Roch Thériault was born in 1947 in rural Quebec, Canada, into a large working-class Roman Catholic family. From an early age, he exhibited troubling behaviors, animal cruelty, a fascination with control, and a propensity for violence that were often dismissed or poorly understood. As a young man, he drifted through life, taking odd jobs and developing a deep-seated resentment toward authority and traditional medicine, despite having no formal medical training himself. In the early 1970s, Theriault became enamored with the burgeoning Back to the Land movement and the charismatic fringe religions of the era. He blended elements of Adventism, apocalyptic prophecy, and his own narcissistic grandiosity to form a personal theology in which he was the central, divinely appointed figure. He began preaching a doctrine of radical self-sufficiency, rejection of modern medicine and government, and absolute obedience to his spiritual and medical guidance. By 1978, he had convinced his first wife, a nurse named Solange Boilard, and a handful of other disillusioned seekers to follow him into the wilderness of Quebec near the town of Saint-Jogues. They named their commune the Ant Hill Kids, a moniker suggesting industriousness and collective sacrifice. The reign of terror had begun. The commune, initially a cluster of crude cabins and later a single overcrowded house, was a pressure cooker of psychological and physical control. Theriault, who now demanded to be called Moses or Dad, established himself as the sole conduit to God, the only legitimate healer and the absolute lawmaker. Members, who eventually numbered around 24, including many young children, were completely severed from their former lives. Their identities were erased. They were given new biblical names and worked grueling days of manual labor, farming, and odd jobs for neighboring towns, with all money going directly to Theriault. His medical practices, a core tenet of the cult's ideology, were a horrifying blend of amateur surgery, brutal folk remedies, and outright torture. He performed unsterilized dental extractions with pliers, amputated limbs without anesthesia using a hacksaw, and conducted invasive, unnecessary abdominal surgeries on kitchen tables. He claimed God guided his hands, and any protest was met with severe punishment or declared a test of faith. Members were systematically malnourished, existing on a meager diet while Theriault ate well, and subjected to bizarre rituals, including forced purges and enemas he claimed would cleanse sin from the body. As his power became absolute, Theriault's behavior escalated from tyrannical to profoundly sadistic. The abuse was systematic, but several victims stand out in the annals of the cult's horrors. Gabrielle Lavallee, a former member who became Theriault's second-in-command and lover, was one of the first to experience his surgical madness. In 1986, suspecting her of infidelity, Theriault performed a cesarean section on her without cause or medical knowledge. He sliced her abdomen open with a knife, pulled out her intestines, and attempted to remove her appendix before sewing her back up with a needle and thread. Miraculously, she survived. Jeanette Lavallee, no relation, another follower, suffered relentless abuse. After complaining of abdominal pain, Theriault declared her appendix was the problem. In a barbaric procedure, he cut her open, could not find the appendix, and instead removed a section of her intestine, leaving her with a permanent colostomy bag fashioned from a plastic yogurt container. Her pain and humiliation were constant. The most infamous case was that of Lise Gagnon. After a minor dispute in 1988, Theriault flew into a rage. Holding her down, he accused a demon of residing in her abdomen. He then used a box cutter to disembowel her. In a state of psychotic frenzy, he removed several of her organs, including a kidney, which he reportedly showed to other terrified members. He then attempted to cleanse the cavity with boiling water before sewing her up. Lisa Gagnon died of sepsis and massive trauma 2 agonizing days later, her body buried in a shallow grave on the property. Theriault's medical delusion was the cult's most deadly feature. He amassed a collection of crude surgical tools, saws, pliers, scalpels, and kitchen knives, and presented his butchery as divine healing. He diagnosed illnesses at whim, often interpreting physical complaints as spiritual failings or signs of demonic possession. A headache might warrant a trepanation, drilling into the skull. A toothache would lead to the violent removal of multiple teeth. He particularly targeted women's reproductive systems, performing forced abortions and sterilizations, citing the need to control the colony's population and purity. These acts were not just medical malpractice. They were instruments of terror, domination, and a perverse demonstration of his godlike power over life and death. The members, isolated, brainwashed, and terrorized, came to believe that their suffering was a necessary part of their salvation, and that Dad's crude knife was somehow holier than a surgeon's sterilized scalpel. Despite the climate of fear, some members found the courage to flee. The first major escape came in the late 1980s. Gabrielle Lavallee, after surviving her brutal surgery, managed to escape with her children. She went directly to the police. However, her story was so grotesque, so unbelievable, that authorities initially struggled to comprehend it. She was a traumatized woman from an isolated cult, and her claims of kitchen table disembowelment sounded like deranged fiction. Nevertheless, her escape and testimony prompted the first police raid on the compound in 1988. They found a squalid, chaotic environment and evidence of strange medical procedures, but did not immediately uncover the full extent of the horrors. Theriault was a master manipulator, convincing some members to lie and downplaying the situation. He was arrested on minor charges but released, allowing him to relocate the cult to a remote property in Burnt River, Ontario, further from Quebec's scrutiny. The move to Ontario in 1989 did not calm Theriault's brutality, it intensified it. The murder of Lise Gagnon had already occurred. In Burnt River, the violence continued. The breaking point came over a dispute with a male follower, Robert Duguay. In a fit of rage, Theriault attacked Duguay and severed his arm with an axe. This time, there was no hiding the victim. Duguay was taken to a hospital where his story, corroborated by his severed limb, finally provided authorities with the concrete, undeniable evidence they needed. In March 1989, Ontario Provincial Police raided the Burnt River property. What they discovered was a house of horrors, malnourished and injured adults and children, evidence of surgical torture, and human remains. They exhumed the body of Lise Gagnon. The Ant Hill kids were liberated, and Roch Thériault was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with a litany of other violent offenses. In 1993, he was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Lise Gagnon and numerous counts of aggravated assault. The judge, Justice James Chadwick, sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years, a sentence many considered shockingly lenient given the scale and sadism of his crimes. He was also sentenced to concurrent terms for the assaults. His violent end came on February 26, 2011, at the Saskatchewan Penitentiary. Another inmate, a serial killer named Matthew Gerard MacDonald, attacked Theriault in his cell. The motive was reportedly a dispute over religion and cult leadership within the prison walls.